Two massive pythons coiled around her, each tightening squeeze forcing the last breath from her lungs. Out there in the wild, no one could hear her scream. But then, something utterly unexpected happened. From the edge of the forest, a massive brown bear emerged, and what it did next would move anyone who heard the story. This wasn't folklore. It wasn't myth. It was a moment when one living creature chose to save another, not out of hunger or territorial instinct, but something deeper. Elena Hart was a botanist specializing in native medicinal plants. She had spent years exploring the remote wilderness of Northern California. To her, the hidden trails of the Sierra Nevada were more familiar than the streets of her childhood neighborhood. She knew the forest's plant life like a second language, what species were on the brink of extinction, which only bloomed under a thick morning mist, and how to read the signs of a shifting ecosystem. Elena moved through nature with respect, never interfering, never disrupting, always observing. That morning, she had ventured more than 3 miles beyond any marked survey route. Armed with a notebook, a sampling kit, and a small GPS device, she was tracking a rare medicinal plant known to grow only in this remote pocket of wilderness. The sun was still high, the air dry and eerily still. Everything felt just like it always had, until it didn't. From the brush ahead came a strange sound, not rustling leaves, not bird song. It was a soft, steady hiss, like something sliding slowly across the damp, decaying forest floor. Then something struck her from behind, fast and heavy, like a whip. She hit the ground hard, the impact knocking the wind clean out of her. Before she could turn, a second blow landed. 2 massive pythons, likely released illegally into the wild and now grown far beyond what anyone could have imagined, had coiled themselves around her. She never saw them coming. She didn't even have time to scream before they began to constrict. One arm pinned, chest compressed. She kicked and writhed, gasping for air. No one was nearby, no rangers for miles, and the forest watched in silence. As consciousness began to fade, it wasn't fear that filled Elena's mind, but waves of regret. She thought of her mother, who had taught her to identify herbs by the scent of their leaves. She thought of the old dog waiting on the porch back home, and of her unfinished research manuscript, still open on her desk. Then something changed in the brutal pressure crushing her body. A sound, deep, primal, rose from the depths of the forest. Like thunder splitting the earth, it echoed through the trees, rumbling through Elena's bones. Through tear-blurred, oxygen-starved eyes, she caught a flicker of motion, something brown, fast as lightning. A massive brown bear. Its fur bristled, claws gleamed, the sheer bulk of it charged forward, but it wasn't coming for her. It didn't even look at her. It barreled straight toward the creatures wrapped around her body. The bear slammed the ground with its full weight, tearing and slashing without hesitation. A python screamed, sharp, high, furious. One snake was ripped away and hurled into the underbrush. The other tightened its grip in a panicked frenzy. But the bear didn't back off. It kept attacking, its entire frame shaking with every strike. Elena felt the crushing coils around her chest and stomach loosen, as if a rope were retreating in fear. Air rushed into her lungs like icy knives. She doubled over, coughing violently, relearning how to breathe. When she opened her eyes again, the bear was still there, bloodied and massive, standing guard while the twitching body of the remaining snake slithered backward into the shadows. Then, silence. The bear turned. Its eyes met hers. No forest, no fear, no sound. Just 2 living beings, breathing, facing each other. The bear gave a single, low snort, then turned and walked away. No threat, no hunger. Just gone. Elena lay on the forest floor. She didn't know how long she'd been there, but she knew one thing for certain. She had been saved by something the world had always taught her to fear. She didn't remember losing consciousness, only the brutal moment when breath returned, tearing through her chest like a blade, raw and burning. Her eyes fluttered open in a haze. Above her, branches swayed, blurring in the dappled light of late afternoon. The sun, filtering through the canopy, painted the air in streaks of gold and ember red, like flowing fire. Every breath sent pain rippling through her chest, a harsh reminder of the coils that had nearly ended her life. Slowly, she rolled onto her side. Her back arched as she moved, and she felt the stiffness of dried blood crusted against her shirt. Her palms were caked with dust and grit. The forest had fallen into a suspicious silence. No more hissing, no more sounds, just her ragged breathing and the brittle crunch of dead leaves beneath her. The bear was gone. Elena pushed herself upright, half expecting to glimpse it at the tree line or catch a flash of movement between the trunks. Nothing. Only stillness. She touched her side, then her shoulder. Bruised, swollen, but no open wounds. No fresh blood. Somehow she was still alive. She managed to stand, every muscle aching in protest. Her legs trembled. The GPS in her shirt pocket was shattered, screen cracked, antenna bent and broken. Useless. No signal, no flares. No one would even know she was missing until morning. She looked down at the ground where the fight had happened. Leaves were scattered, branches snapped and flung aside. Deep grooves scored the soil, massive imprints crisscrossing in the mud. Tufts of coarse brown-gray fur clung to a scratched tree trunk, and blood. Not just hers, but the bear's too. Elena stood in stunned silence, her heart thudding hard in her chest. Then, almost inaudibly, she whispered, "It fought for me." But why? She limped toward her backpack, tossed several feet away, half lodged in a tangle of brush. Kneeling, hands shaking, she unzipped it. Inside, she found her backup compass, a small roll of gauze, and a bottle of water. She unscrewed the cap and drank deeply. The cold liquid slid down her throat, soothing, painful, strange, like her body had to relearn how to accept life. Then, slowly, she began to treat her injuries. She cleaned the scratches on her arms, gently checked her ribs, and wrapped her bruised torso in gauze. But her mind refused to settle. It spun, not with fear, but with a single, unshakable image. The bear's eyes when it turned to look at her. It hadn't seen her as prey, not as a random presence in its forest. Its eyes had held something else. Caution, maybe, but also something profoundly human, a recognition. Time stretched unnaturally long after that. Elena began the slow journey back to the research station, each step a battle. The pain didn't let up. But worse than the ache was the silence. She heard nothing. No insects, no birds, not even wind. Only questions clawing inside her. Was the bear hurt? Did it survive the fight? And would it come back to this place? By dusk, she reached the edge of the forest trail. Her body gave out, and she collapsed beside the weathered wooden sign marking the boundary of the reserve. That's where the ranger truck found her, bruised, battered, and caked in dirt, but alive. They were stunned to see her emerge from the forest on her own, in that condition. Now she sat inside the small ranger station, a thick blanket draped over her shoulders, a steaming cup of ginger tea cradled in her trembling hands. The scent of pine wood from the paneled walls mixed with the lingering odor of sweat and dried blood on her jacket, making everything feel strangely real, as if she had never left the forest at all. Across from her, a ranger, Rachel, stood with a notepad in hand, her expression a blend of concern and quiet disbelief. "You said a bear saved you from 2 pythons?" Elena nodded. Nothing more. She knew how it sounded, like the fever dream of a trauma survivor. A scientist in shock, her imagination running wild. Rachel flipped back through her notes. "We've had reports before, people illegally releasing non-native species into the Sierra. Sulcata tortoises, tropical snakes. But pythons 3-4 meters long? If they're out there, they'd have to be surviving on big prey." Elena tightened her grip on the warm mug between her freezing hands. "I wasn't hallucinating. I felt the pressure of their bodies crushing my lungs. I thought I was going to die." She looked up. And the bear, it didn't fight like it was defending territory or looking for food. It looked at me, with an expression I've never seen in any animal. Rachel didn't write anything else. She simply whispered, barely audible. "We found claw marks, deep into the tree roots." Blood. Bear fur snagged in the pine bark. It looks like you really did go through that. Silence filled the wooden room. Not the silence of doubt, but of not knowing how to explain what had happened. That night, they filed an incident report, recording GPS coordinates from the ranger station's locator. An ecological support team was dispatched the next morning with drones to survey the area. They found blood, clumps of brown fur clinging to tree bark, deep gouges in the trunks, clear signs of a violent struggle. But no trace of the bear, no carcass, no drag marks, no returning silhouette. That night, Elena lay motionless on a cot in the makeshift clinic, staring at the cracked wood ceiling above her. And for the first time since the attack, she wept, not from fear, but from something quieter, deeper, gratitude too big for words, and an aching need to know if the creature that saved her was still out there. She couldn't sleep. Even with her wounds bandaged, the injections given and permission granted to return to her home at the mountain's base, her body still trembled in the cool night air. But it wasn't the pain that kept her awake. It was the bear, that brown bear, the one that had charged between life and death without cause, without a signal, without anything in return. She could still see its eyes, not panicked, not wild, but calm, deliberate, as if in that instant it had made a choice, not from instinct, but from something else, something almost conscious, something that felt incredibly human. 2 days after returning home, Elena did something she couldn't explain, not even to herself. She packed lightly, slipped her camera into her bag, checked her infrared sensors, grabbed an old notebook, and drove back to the Sierra Preserve. Not to resume research, not to collect data, but simply to return. She told no one, made no mention in her field logs. Yet the moment she stepped into the forest, everything felt different, not because the trees had changed, but because she had. Each step back toward the clearing felt like walking across layers of memory. The damp scent of pine, the musk of moss and decay, the whisper of wind through the canopy, all of it brought her back to that moment between life and death and the gaze that bridged it. Her breathing slowed, deepened. When she reached the place, she froze. The leaves still swayed gently above, but the signs were unmistakable. The drag marks from the snakes, the gouges in the trees, dark stains faintly visible on the stone. Blood. Elena knelt beside a shattered, rotting log and pulled out her camera. Not to take a picture, but to use the zoom lens like a scope. She scanned the gaps between tree trunks. Nothing. Then, movement. From the forest's edge, a shadow appeared. She raised the lens. It was the bear. It walked with a limp. A long, raw scar ran along its right flank. Swollen, healing. Elena slowly lowered the camera. She didn't move, didn't speak. She just looked. And the bear, 15 meters away, looked back. Then, something happened that tightened her throat. The bear sat. No growl, no threat, just stillness. As if it remembered, too. The space between them filled with an unspoken understanding, something beyond instinct, something shared. Elena didn't move closer. She didn't need to. This was enough. So she sat down too. Minutes passed, maybe 10, maybe 20. Finally, the bear rose first. It looked back once more, then turned and vanished silently into the thick pines. Elena stayed seated for almost an hour, unable to untangle her thoughts. This wasn't just survival. Not coincidence, but something shared, a crossing of paths, a story that had begun with fear and ended with connection. When she finally stood and left that clearing, the sun had sunk low, casting the forest in golden, honeyed light. And in that light, she felt something new. Not fear, not doubt, but peace. Whatever the bear's reason, instinct, memory, or something deeper, didn't matter anymore. It had spared her, fought for her, and in its own way, acknowledged her. And now Elena knew. She couldn't keep it to herself. That story, that moment, couldn't be buried in memory like some strange, forgotten miracle. But more than telling it, Elena needed to understand what had connected them. Back home, on a sleepless night, she powered up the hard drive connected to the infrared cameras she had placed throughout the forest months earlier, originally meant to monitor animal activity near rare medicinal plants. Most of the footage had once seemed irrelevant, nothing useful to a botanist, nothing tied to her main research, but now everything had changed. She sat up all night, fast-forwarding through hours of clips, deer, foxes, squirrels, even a mountain goat flickering past the lens. Then at 3:40 a.m., on a rainy night, 3 weeks before the attack, something massive moved across the far edge of the valley camera. Elena leaned in. There, the bear. Thick fur, broad shoulders, unmistakable. But it wasn't alone. Behind it, limping, was a cub. Elena froze the frame, staring in silence. A small, tight ache clenched in her chest. Her hand gripped the edge of the desk. There had been no sign of the cub on the day she was saved. Was it lost or gone? Had the bear wandered the forest searching for its missing cub, and when it found Elena, trapped, thrashing in the coils of death, had something within it responded? She watched more footage. Days passed. Nothing new. Then, in a clip recorded just 2 days before the attack, the same camera, the same forest frame, the bear returned. Alone. This time, it lingered. It stood still for several minutes, staring into the empty space where its cub had once walked. Elena paused the video, leaned back, closed her eyes. The pieces began to fall into place. That brown bear had lost its child. And when it saw her, crushed in the grip of a predator, breathless, helpless, something inside it had shifted. Maybe it was instinct, something ancient and primal, but maybe it was more. Maybe it was recognition. A memory rising from some deep, quiet grief. Because that bear had once watched its own young, small, fragile, struggling to breathe. And now it saw the same thing again, but this time in a human. Elena backed up the footage to a separate drive. She couldn't stop thinking about it. The eyes, the action. That moment in the forest hadn't been random. It couldn't have been just instinct. It felt personal, almost spiritual. She brought the video to the ranger station, the same one that had first received her after the attack, and laid out the full timeline. She showed them frame by frame, the mother bear, the cub, then the lone return just before the attack. Some furrowed their brows, skeptical, but others simply nodded in silence. One woman quietly wiped her eyes and whispered, "That bear didn't just save you. It grieved with you." After the meeting, they agreed to let Elena install a new set of monitoring cameras, high resolution, wide lens, long battery life, along the northern edge of the preserve, where the bear had first been seen. No one could say for certain if it would come back. But if it did, even just once, perhaps, just perhaps, they might better understand the story the forest had been trying to tell, in silence. Elena returned to the forest one final time on a crisp autumn morning. The Sierra woods were now dressed in golden decay. The air hung heavy with the scent of old pine and damp moss, as if trying to preserve every footstep that had ever passed through. This time, her backpack wasn't full of scientific tools. No sample kits, no audio recorders, no topographic maps. Only a small wooden box, carefully wrapped in soft cloth. Inside, a simple pendant, one side carved with a bear's paw, rough, solid. The other held a single word, "Thank you." Elena called it a symbol for what could never be put into words. She had once written in her journal, "If there is a spirit that lives within the forest, quietly watching, quietly understanding us better than we understand ourselves, then it is this, the spirit of the wild." No ceremony, no prayer, just a return, silent and complete. She reached the clearing where it had all begun. The forest had begun to heal, but faint scars still marked the trees, and impressions in the soil remained, like memories pressed deep into the earth. Elena placed the box on a flat stone, unhidden, untied. Then she stood, not waiting. And then, as if the forest answered with a heartbeat of its own, it came. From the tree line, moving as quietly as an old shadow, the bear emerged, its fur now tinged with silver around the muzzle and temples. Its gait was slower than before, but the eyes, those eyes, remained unchanged. Steady, aware. The scar along its flank was still visible, healed but never gone. Elena said nothing. She simply bowed her head, a gesture of respect, as to an equal. The bear stopped a few steps away. The silence stretched, deep and profound. Then it nodded, just once, barely perceptible. But to Elena, it meant everything. No growls, no touch, just a look. A thank you, spoken without words, shared between two beings who had stood on the edge of death and returned. Then the bear turned, slowly, calmly, and slipped into the shadows of the trees, as if it had never been there at all. Elena stayed a long while after. The next morning, when she returned with a small team of young researchers to check the equipment, the wooden box was gone. No trace of it remained, only a single bear track, large, distinct, pressed into the soft earth at the heart of the clearing. A mark, an answer. Months later, Elena completed the final manuscript for a book she once thought she'd never write. It wasn't just about botany, native herbs, or the Sierra ecosystem. It was about the silent spirits that dwell in the green. She titled it, The Silent Spirits of the Forest. Not everyone understood, not every scientist believed. But at a small book launch held at an ecological institute in Northern California, a retired colleague, once a wildlife conservationist, approached her after flipping through the opening pages. He looked at Elena and spoke in a voice barely above a whisper, as if afraid to disturb something sacred. There are actions that don't come from instinct. They come from memory, from pain, and from a kind of love that has no words. Elena didn't respond. She simply smiled, eyes drifting toward the open window that looked out over the distant forest. She never saw the spirit of the forest again. But every year, she returned. Quietly walking the old trail through the Sierra, the one where it all began. And each time she left a small token, a bare paw carved by her own hand onto a thin piece of wood, gently fastened to a tree trunk, as if telling the story once more. The forest still echoed with the sounds of life. Birds calling from the canopy, wind slipping through the treetops, and sometimes a strange sound from deep within that made her pause and listen. But she was no longer afraid. Because some connections need no words, some debts can never be repaid with things, and some bonds are forged in silence, through loss, through grace, and carved into the earth, never to fade. The forest still echoed with the sounds of life, birds calling to one another high in the canopy, wind whispering through the treetops, and sometimes a strange noise from deep within that made her pause and listen. But she wasn't afraid anymore, because some connections need no words. Some debts can't be repaid with things, and some bonds are forged in silence, through loss, through grace, and etched into the earth, never to be lost. If this story moved you, please consider subscribing, leaving a like, and sharing it with someone who still believes in second chances and in unexpected, silent heroes.